Good afternoon, church. Welcome to this week's interview. It's a bit like the Jumi takeover, but don't worry, it's fine. You'll find out why just shortly. I hope you've been managing to watch quite a few of these over the few weeks that we've been doing them. They have been really good, actually. But today, it is my absolute pleasure to be interviewing someone from our church. And it isn't just anyone from our church, it's actually our senior pastor. It's Neil. So Neil's going to take a minute just to introduce himself and we'll kick off.
Thank you, Jumi. This tables being turned is an interesting experience. Well, my name's Neil. I'm part of the Salford Elim Church and delighted, I think I'm delighted. I'll tell you at the end whether I'm delighted to speak with Jumi today.
Very good, good. So I kind of want to split the interview into sort of two parts. And the first part is just kind of getting to know you. You, Neil, as the man that you are. And then we'll talk about, your ministry in the second half. So tell us a little bit about yourself, about family, about your church origins. So, how you came to faith.
Okay. So I'm married to Maggie. We've been married since 1985, so 35 years this year. We have two children, Beth and Joel, who are both in their 30s, who both are married with others, and we have, certainly by the time this appears, we will have two grandchildren, because tomorrow Beth is due to give birth. So by the time this comes out, we will have two granddaughters, which is absolutely fantastic.
That's amazing. It's really exciting.
Yeah, been part of Salford, lived in Salford since '88. So, this has been home for all our lives really now. And children born, bred, live still in Salford. For me, the relationship with church more generally, I was born into a family of that belonged to the Salvation Army. We were like fourth generation, which in terms of the army goes back quite a way, because the Salvation Army was only sort of mid-19th century. So actually we were quite, as a family line, quite involved quite early. My parents were church leaders in that denomination. And I suppose, like every teenager, you maybe for lots of teenagers, growing up in a Christian family, and particularly being part of the Salvation Army, which was like being part of church, but slightly worse, because you had to wear a uniform that sort of signified that you were different. So on a Sunday, we would get pile in the car to go to church, wearing the uniform of the army, and the kids on the street. I don't know how often this happened, but in my memory, it certainly happened at least once. But of course, maybe every week. I don't think it was every week, but I remember it. They'd queue up and sort of sing "Glory, Glory, Hallelujah." So because it was very evident that you were going to the Salvation Army, and you did open house and all that sort of stuff. So the temptation when you're a teenager for me was that to separate life out, to sort of, in secondary school particularly, to sort of have one life there with friends and my social life there, and then the church life, and the big sort of intention was to always keep those two lives separate, because they wouldn't have recognized one another. And becoming a Christian happened because, and some of the folks who are listening to this will know the story, but I became a Christian essentially having been brought up in this family of faith, and making childlike professions of faith as a young child. But actually, when I was 16, the BBC got in contact with us to say, would I be willing to be filmed as part of a schools program for the BBC? because the BBC wanted to make a schools programme about young Salvationists, and there was myself and a young girl, as she was then, in London. And so they came and they filmed us, they filmed me talking, they filmed doing the army stuff, and it was to go out as a schools programme. And I think I was 15 when that was happening. And then when I was 16, I was part of the sixth form at school, and they invited the whole of the sixth form on a Friday afternoon to come and watch, to go to the lecture room. Now, those were the days long before you were dreamt of, Jumi, in the good old days of a previous century, where
because I'm young.
The technology of a school consisted of one 32-inch TV chained to a big stand in a lecture theatre. And we often would go down on a Friday afternoon because it was general studies and we'd watch films or whatever. And this Friday afternoon, the teacher introduced it and said, there's something we want you to watch. We think you'd be interested in this. And it was me. And it was awful. It was awful on every level. It was awful because I was stilted and wooden and embarrassed and embarrassing. And it was awful because all of my peers, I was sitting in the back row just being Jack the lad, really. And they heard me talk about this other life.
Oh, wow.
And when I left that room, as we were going out, you know what I mean? I was like, this was a time when lots of Christians talked about the rapture, you know, that Jesus would come and take the church away. And I kind of was like, now would be good.
Yeah.
I mean, now would be really good. I don't really care if I go or stay, but now would be good. Just take the attention away. But one guy, as I went out of the room, said, "You don't really believe all that crap, do you?" And it felt like time slowed down a bit. And I said, "Well, actually, the truth is, I do." Wow. And that actually was the moment I became a Christian. There were other things going on, but that's the moment I became a Christian. And nailed my colours to the mast. And in the sixth form, we set up a CU, and we did a whole stack of things. We saw people coming to faith. But it was. I became a Christian because two worlds collided. And I think it would have been easy for me to have kept them separate and continued separately. And I think I wouldn't be where I am now had that not happened.
That's really true. There's a reconciling, there's an ownership that comes, even if you're raised in church, even if you grow up in church, even you've got ministers for parents. There has to come a point, doesn't there, really, where it becomes personal. And that's amazing that you had that experience.
Yeah. I pray that this never happens to any other teenager I know.
Oh, that's a beautiful story. I really like that. It's cool. So when you're not churching, what kind of things do you enjoy? Do you have any hobbies that you'd like to share with us?
I think, I mean, there's lots of interest. I don't know if they're hobbies as much as interest, but I listen to music avidly. All the people of my age should listen to, like Bob Dylan and Bruce Springsteen, because essentially they're 15 to 20 years older than me, so they talk about aging and what happens, and they do it in a way that I appreciate. So so music is actually a big deal for us. So in the good old days when you could go to concerts, me and Mags would go to Bury Met, which is a small theatre in Bury where they do a lot of folky stuff, and we're quite into that, and we would go to music festivals in the summer if we can.
Cool.
I read a lot, so that's kind of like, you know, the two things are music and books. They go a long way for me. And there are other interests, sort of things like I'm really interested in local history. I'm really interested in. I sound like a real geek when I say this sort of stuff. That's a problem.
A little bit.
No, I'm going to stop now. Well, in my spare time, I drag race, or I don't know. I just need something more interesting. That would be re-reported as he wears drag. I don't know why he said that.
Even if that was true, none of us would believe it.
No, that's a problem. No, he's just a geek.
Yeah, books and music.
We got him.
That's it. Oh, so I think also to say about you is I find you, and this is my own personal perception, I haven't done a poll, I don't know if anyone else thinks this at all, this is just me. I find you very understated, I find you very humble, you're not really this kind of braggadocious type of character. But for this one time only, if you were to say something you are really good at, like, you know what, like if there was a competition for this thing, I would win it. I want to hear about that one thing that, in your opinion, you think you're really, really good
at. This is not going to help with this image of not being geeky. I think I'm quite good I'm quite good at adapting. I'm quite good at public speaking, and I'm quite good at adapting to who's in the room quite quickly, so that I can give. This is what I think. I don't know if it's true, but this is what I would like to think I'm good at, is giving a sense to people who are there that actually this is a moment that we're in together, rather than something that's been prepared and then just delivered regardless of who's in the room. So I think I can read a room well, and I think I can adapt and adapt to what's going on in front of me. And it's to be honest, it's something I love. So for a number of years, I taught in a theological college. I was a lecturer, and I'd have the notes, and you distribute them beforehand and all the rest of it. But lots of times, I'd say, "Okay, you got the notes. What I really want to do today is," and just go out on a limb, and I really enjoyed that, and I think I learned how to do it in those days, really, with these poor students who were paying for the privilege. But it was that sense of being able to say, I think there's some things that I want to communicate, but but it's to you and not more generally. So I think that's probably what if there were a world competition for that, that would be a very niche world competition that I might come third in. If there were 3 people.
If you could bottle it and sell it.
Yeah, do you know what I mean? It's not a skill that's useful for anything. It's just I think I'm quite good at it.
Basically, you can talk.
I can talk to people in the room.
To anybody.
To anybody, yeah. That's it. I can talk to anybody.
Great skill, you know, it's not common. But I guess that skill as a pastor is probably quite a powerful one. So I guess it's probably a good point to just sort of change tact a bit and now talk about Neil the pastor.
Smooth.
I'm slick. So that kind of story of you being 15 and on BBC and been kind of hiding your faith, or at least keeping it to one side in general public, but it just being projected in front of you and you kind of being faced with it. Would you say that was the point where you knew you wanted to be a pastor, or actually this was now the point where you found Christianity started to become integrated into your life? And then when did you know you wanted to go into ministry?
I think because of the time, and I think because of the church culture I was part of at that point. I think it was almost, in my head at least, it was, if you really want to serve God, then you really go and work in a church. It was that. I think I'd been prepared for it in some sense. What I set out to do. So my idea was, when I was a teenager, there was a program on TV called The Paper Chase, which was a BBC Two. In those days, Jumi, let me tell you about the old days. There were 3 channels. There was BBC One, BBC Two, and ITV. Nobody watched BBC Two, so there was 2 channels. But there was on BBC Two, there was this program called The Paper Chase, which was a story about an American law school, essentially. And I was fascinated by this, and so from a fairly youngish teenager, sort of 13ish, I decided that's what I want to do. I want to be a lawyer. And I think, in a sense, it's interesting looking back now. I don't want to read too much into it, but it's interesting because that act of speaking and being persuasive is not that dissimilar to being in a court setting. So that's where I was going. That was my trajectory of I wanted to go and do law, and all the rest of it. But I think at the time it was that, well, if you really want to serve God, then you've got to go in church. What I would say now is different, but I think there was that sense of it's the next step. And when I left school, I went to live in Belgium for a year with and work for a church as sort of like an intern. And during that period, I went with the intention of thinking, is this a sort of life that I would like to be involved with? And then I went to college and went to a Bible college in London. And every week they'd have a guest speaker from a different aspect. And every week I'd have a new call to something else. But in the end, it was like, no, I think church would be the thing to go into. So I did. And I suppose in church, being part of Salford Elim, church has been the firm anchor for me. I think it's what pastors need. I think that might sound a bit of an odd thing, but I think if you've got a relationship with a church where the church allows you to grow, allows you to develop, allows you to be who you are, allows you to exercise, who accepts you. So one of the lovely things about being part of the Salford Elim Church was, I was 24 when I came. I was far too young to be given responsibility for anything other than a dog, really. But this group of people in our church, and there are one or two of them still would be around, accepted me as a 24-year-old. So the likes of Pat Sloan, the likes of Joe Northall and Liz Pilling were there, and Joan Ashton was there. One or two folks like that were around when I came, and they accepted me as this very young, very green, very enthusiastic, but lacking any experience and a whole stack of wisdom, really. But what they did was they allowed me to be a pastor, a leader, and allowed me to change, allowed me to grow, allowed me to develop. And I think I've needed that. It's anchored me. It's kept me grounded, really, as much as I can be. So when did I know I wanted to be a church leader? Probably back then as a teenager. I knew that there was something about leadership within me. I think finding the context, it was almost like, well, it felt almost automatic, and I don't think it is automatic, but it felt like that then. But actually, I think being part of church has not only anchored me, I think it's kept me faithful to Jesus, really, if I'm honest. So that's a bit of a rambling answer to your very simple question, but
you don't ramble, Neil. No.
You're very kind.
But yeah, this is something I found out recently. You're not the only Elim pastor from your family.
No. I have a brother called Paul, and so the story is that when around that time when I became a Christian, just afterwards, my parents had been baptized in the Spirit and spoken in tongues. And at the time, this is back in the 80s, but at the time in our area of the Salford where we lived in West Yorkshire, that wasn't accepted by the army as valid. And my parents were part-time pastors of a small congregation at that time. They'd been full-time leaders and then come out and then gone back in again. And they were told, I mean, it was sort of either you stop speaking about this life in the Spirit and stay, or you leave. And they left. And it was a difficult time, because when you're part of any organization, really, from time to time you might think about leaving, but then when you do leave, you think, well, where are we going to go now? And our family were going in different directions. I'm older than my brother, so my brother was going with my mum and dad, and they were going to local Baptist church or wherever, and I was a little older, so I was able to go on my own to some of the charismatic churches and what have you. And one Sunday morning, my mum said, "Why don't we go to the Elim church today? And if anybody," this was the state we were in, "if anybody speaks to us before the service, why don't we stay?" I was like, we had very low bar of expectation at this time. If anybody speaks to us before the service begins, why don't we stay? And one woman did. She wasn't, looking back, she was lovely, but she had her own issues, she had her own struggles, but she spoke to us before the service began, and we looked at each other and went, "Oh, okay, fair enough." It turned out that it was the first Sunday of the new minister. Okay, we didn't know that, but it was. And so when we were going out, he was standing at the door and shaking hands with everybody and making appointments to see people. And so we went, and he said, "Well, can I see him?" I think they must have explained to him, "Well, when Youre had you, we're just visiting. We've only decided to stay because she spoke to us." And he said, "No, well, I'll come and see you on Wednesday night." So he came on Wednesday night, and he listened to my parents' story. And this is not how you must do it in any context, but he said to my dad, "I think I'd like you to be my assistant pastor." Well, that's ridiculous, to be honest. But he said, clearly there's one or two things we'll have to sort out first. Like, you'll have to join the church, you'll have to get baptized, because we weren't baptized, because that wasn't our tradition, and so on and so forth. But within a year later, by that stage, my dad was the assistant pastor in Halifax. And then I went, so now the family are part of the church, Dad's part of the leadership. I went on this overseas year with Elim, and joined Elim. And then after a few years, my brother also became an Elim minister, and he's now one of the national leaders. So it's kind of like one of those interesting. I mean, the really nice thing is, and this is true. It's kind of like not just a nice anecdote. The confirmation was one woman who had her own issues, who spoke to a family before the service began without having any inkling of an idea. And I suspect she still doesn't know that we are what we are now because, in part at least, because one person just got out of a seat and went to speak to new people.
That is cool. I've got goosebumps. I love that idea. Because I'd like to think that your mom made this statement, and almost it's like a statement of faith. And then almost like maybe God spoke to that lady in the church. So like, this family is coming in the door. Just say hi. And then look where we are. It's weird. It doesn't seem just ordinary.
No, it isn't, but it
sounds quite divine.
Yeah. There was a definite, I think, looking back, there was definite sense of God positioning us. It wasn't coincidental. It was the minister's first day. It wasn't coincidental that he was willing to come and visit a new family that he didn't know. I mean, that was a big deal as well, because he could have easily said, "Well, look, come back a few times and then I'll come see you." It was wildly crazy that he would sort of go out on a limb and say, "Well, I want you to be part of this." But yeah, I'm not the only one, and that's why, really.
That's lovely. It kind of echoes what you said earlier on about acceptance. Your parents had delved deep into the Spirit of God and had been filled and had lost acceptance, if you like, from Salvation Army, but they came here now to Elim and found acceptance. It's beautiful.
Yeah, that's a nice way of putting it. Yeah.
Church life isn't linear. Faith is not linear. It's different in different seasons, isn't it? What for you, Neil, would you say, and you don't have to go into specifics, but generally, what have you found hardest in your 30 plus years in ministry?
As a minister?
As a minister, yeah.
I think the hardest times are when relationships founder, when they go astray, when either because of mistakes that have been made or misunderstandings or disappointments and disillusionments. I think when those things happen, those are the hardest times to live through. And I think I'd like to think that when I was younger, it happened more because I had less wisdom. But when they break, that's really hard. And there's, and when you see it happening with others, it's the hardest thing. Not because you think that Christian life, you're right, Chris, life of faith is not linear, and you know that these things happen. There's a reason why Jesus said, I'm going to teach you to pray, and one of the major things I want you to pray is that you forgive one another. It's like Jesus almost saying, no, you're going to get hurt, so expect it, so be ready to forgive. It's not a tragedy to just forgive. And you can forgive, but relationships still are damaged, and that is the hardest thing. I think that's the thing that brings pain. Yeah,
it's true. I think I remember coming to the understanding of, for my mind anyway, understanding friendships, and I remember being really quite disturbed when friendships broke up, and I was like, I don't really understand. We're meant to be friends forever, surely. And the thing I kind of came away from with that was like friendships are seasons, and some seasons are lifelong. Some seasons are now and again. But even that person that helped me on the tube stairs with my 2 massively heavy suitcases to carry my suitcases up them stairs, in that moment, they were a friend. And I think for me, I found a lot of comfort in just understanding that, yes, my mindset might have been that this relationship was going to be forever, but I'm not all knowing.
Yeah.
And I think, like you're saying, it's just kind of being graceful about that and addressing the idea of forgiveness.
I think the other thing that helps in some ways is a sense of hopefulness about eternity. Someone's described it as Bruce Cockburn in one of his songs described heaven as being a festival of friends, and there's that lovely idea of actually maybe in eternity this is what eternity will be the restoration of all the things that were broken. And I think that is true. I think we will quote to one another quite regularly, there'll be no more tears, there'll be no more sadness, there'll be no more pain because the former things have passed away. And I think wrapped into that sense of renewal is not just physical stuff. It's not just the healing of the hurts that have gone deep into us, but actually the healing of relationships that were never able to get disentangled this side of eternity. And maybe that festival of friends idea is the one that we live with, that we see through a glass darkly, but actually one day it will be clear. And one day the things that are broken will be redeemed and be repaired. And yeah, it doesn't make it easier in the here, but it does give you a sense of there's a long game to play here.
That's right.
Don't give up too soon, I suppose, is what I'm thinking.
Yeah. And a related cousin to hope is love. So what do you love about being a minister? What revs you up, gets you going in the morning? You're like, hey, I'm a minister, let's do this again. Like, what do you love about being in ministry?
I think what I love about being a minister. I suppose there's two things. There's things I love about this. It's all about me.
It's all about me.
There's things I love about minister in as much as some things I do because of the role I have that you can see have an effect on other people.
Yeah.
So I love it when I'm preaching, teaching, and people go, I got that for the first time. I didn't ever really understand it before. Now I can see, or I see it differently. That's brilliant because I've sort of wrestled with something and now I've been able to deliver it in a way that other people go, yeah, I've got it. That's brilliant. But the other thing, of course, is where you see people do more than you see things being multiplied because people are doing more than you ever could have done yourself. That's a brilliant thing. And you see people develop and you see people come into roles that's brilliant. I think the other thing that really revs me up, the thing that I applaud are the the two things really are seeing the acts of kindness that people do. And I hear about them and it's like, wow, that is fantastic. And then I think the other thing is just trying to take note of what's happening. So here's I don't know if I've told people about this, but perhaps I shouldn't. But when I came to be full-time again at the beginning of the year, I was down in TK Maxx at Regent Road before Christmas looking for notebooks. And I came across a notebook called, I don't know if you can read that, Travel Notes it's called. Okay, so in this it's kind of like, so one of my pages is, write the 3 favourite things you've seen today. And the idea is if you go on any long trip, gosh, you'd have to go on a very long trip when you feel this. But I think the idea is you just remember where you've been. So I was in TK Maxx looking at it. It's quite a nice book and it was cheap. And I was looking at it thinking, that's a nice notebook. But the idea of Travel Notes was, in January, one of the things that happened is I stopped traveling. And I was at home, and one of the reasons I stopped traveling was I wanted to be more present here. So I thought, well, what I want to do is I want to buy this as a notebook and I would use it to reflect on the life of our church as though I were a traveller, to try to take note of what I see, try to write down the journey, try and write down the internal journey of what I'm seeing, but also the external journey of the things that bring me joy, the conversations that have been evidences of the grace of God. And I've kept this year, and it's kind of like, I'm probably about 4/5 the way through the book, so I've written quite a bit in it. And it's only for my own use. It's never going to go anywhere. It's not going to. And don't worry, before I die, I'll burn it. But it's that sense of this. This for me is the joy of trying to pay attention, paying close attention to one another. Because when you pay close attention, then you find evidence of the grace of God. And one of the things that, I've often said this, and, you've heard me say it before, but one of the things I've missed during the COVID period, because we've not been able to meet in church in the same way, has been the incidental conversations, because actually that ministry of small talk, where it's not just about, well, I've got something important to say to you, but actually I just want to, where are you? How are you doing? And all of it. To take note of that, I think is a real, you hear the evidence of the grace of God there.
Yeah.
And so all of that brings me joy. All of that brings me joy.
No, I'm a huge journaling, diarying advocate. It's so cathartic and it's so important. And you think you'll remember everything, but actually, if you don't write it down,
you don't.
You don't. You forget.
And if you don't, the problem is on your bad days, you think all the days are going to be like this.
That's right. That's right. Or you think that all the days have been like this, but actually, you're like, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, whether it's 5 words or 5 pages, the idea of at least weekly trying to make some sense of what's going on around you, so vital to your spiritual life, really.
It's important. It's important. Now, before we close, I want to ask you other questions. So we're in this book of Acts, and honestly, I've fallen in love with Acts on a whole other level. And it's funny, you mentioned acts of kindness earlier on. I always think of Acts as acts of kindness, although it wasn't all of Acts. But you know,
I know, it's a good way.
It's very timely. It's very apt. And I want to think that you had some vision, epiphany, some sort of heavenly interaction last year that said, okay, Acts is the book we need to be in, and this is the pace we need to do it. So that when we hit these various points in life in 2020, we'll be at the exact points in Acts. Is that what happened?
Yeah, in September last year, when God told me there was going to be a global pandemic. Not at all. I think
amazing.
What happened, I mean, you know, we were doing some stuff on prayer at the beginning of the year, and then we came into this period of COVID, and there was one or two, three sort of services where it was just like preaching from here, there, and everywhere, but trying to make sense of what was happening with all of us. But I think what happened, and this is kind of what in some ways happens all the time, is I was thinking and praying, okay, so how do we make good use of this time together? And what is the moment? And what struck me when I was thinking about it was the book of Acts is a record of people who didn't know what was going on around them and weren't in control. Mm-hmm. And in a sense, that became then a very obvious theme to reprise as we're going forward, that then they're never really the ones taking, you know, they haven't got a 5-year plan. They haven't got, you know, even there is elements of a strategy in Paul. You know, you see him going to the major cities, but lots of the times he's responding to things that are happening to him or around him that he couldn't have imagined. And I think that's an image of us living the Christian life, really, and it's certainly an image of us as a church. You know, one of the really, you know, beautiful things about the year, and there's been very few beautiful things about the year, but one of the beautiful things about the year is it's like a riff on the old joke. You know, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. Mm-hmm. And you know, January and February, all churches everywhere had their, you know, this is a vision for a year. And lots of churches, you know, there've been lots of national and denominational things of 2020 as like, you know, we've been preparing for 2020 as this sort of, you know, we can see clearly into the, and then, you know, after 10 weeks, everybody's wheels came off.
That's right.
And we all had to adapt, and we all had to say, well, what is God saying to us in the midst of this? And how do we make the best of it? And how do we hang together? And all those sort of questions. And it feels like the discomfort that we feel, and I think for those of us who are relatively powerful, relatively rich, relatively intelligent, relatively controlling, what this situation has done is strip us of all of those things.
Absolutely.
You know, so, you know, for yourself in hospital and others in the NHS, you've had to adapt and you know, in a way that, you know, you're on the front line of all of this, but you're still having to adapt quickly, and you don't feel like you're in control half the time, and things are happening around you. And I think that sense of that one of the things that we were stripped of was this sense of self-sufficient ability to make a future that we want to see. And people like, you know, and I say us, I mean, people like us find that really difficult when it's stripped away from us. We feel disempowered, we feel frustrated, and there's nothing wrong with that in one sense, but there's a sense of which it reminds us that, and this can sound like cliche, but it reminds us that there is a God who actually knew about this. There is a God who's in control. There is a God whose hand is upon the tiller of all of this. Yep. And maybe one of the things that people like me need to learn is you never were in control.
Amen.
You never were in control. You just gave yourself the illusion that you were.
Yeah.
But actually, when push comes to shove and something really strips that sense of you are now able to control your own future, you are thrown back on, well, what's the Spirit saying now? And for me, the book of Acts epitomizes that. And it's no bad thing for us to be reminded that that's how we began. That is the story of God's church. A people who go, don't know what's going on around here, it doesn't feel very good, and you don't feel very comfortable half the time, and yet. And so in trying to work out, read through Acts, I mean, we've read through it slowly. We've spent 9 months on it, and we will stretch to the beginning of February. That's where we're aiming for. And we'll have spent the best part of a year just reading through, and we have read through long passages at times, but that sense of this is how you were born, so this is how now to live. Not a bad way, is it, to remind ourselves as a church and as individuals?
Absolutely not. It's that kind of everyday feel with Acts, isn't it? It's that whole you're living life every day and all the best intentions, as you say. The two scriptures that jumped to my mind are like Ecclesiastes 9, where it says time and chance. It isn't because you're so great, it isn't because you're so strong, it isn't because you've got such a great plan, it isn't because you live in a mansion, but time and chance. Understand that actually God allows us a lot of grace, but he's ultimately in control. And then that other scripture that you mentioned in service one Sunday in 2 Chronicles, where he says, like, we don't know what to do, but our eyes are on you. I feel like 2020s, we all talked about vision, all these other great things, but actually, probably 2020 is just the year of the gaze back on the Lord. Sort of gazing at all those other things that have taken your time, taken your attention, made you feel falsely secure. Put your gaze, put your focus back on me. So.
Yeah. Maybe we should have that as our vision strap as a church. We don't know what to do.
Yeah. If you also don't know what to do,
come join us. Our eyes are upon
it will sell. I really think it will sell. Oh, but on that note, Neil, it's been absolutely fabulous spending time with you. And I say it because you said it. You're our senior, very geeky leader, and we love it. It's great. Just do you. But yeah, thank you for just giving us a little brief look into your life, into the history of your life, and into faith, and into your role as our minister. So we are absolutely, and I know I'm not speaking for myself alone when I say this, we're absolutely honoured and privileged and blessed to have you leading our church, and we just want to pray God's wisdom continue to be with you in your endeavours, in Jesus' name.
Well, thanks a lot, Jumi. It was nice to have the tables turned. Appreciate that.